Welcome to the Train Talk Media Podcast. I'm Chuck Geiger, and we are elated that we have BOOMER Diorama on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chuck. Good to hear from you.
Good to hear from you, too. So let's get to know BOOMER. How did you first get into model railroading, and what originally drew you to HO scale?
Okay, so model railroading, I guess my first kind of exposure, I was probably, 9 or 10. I grew up a couple of blocks away from the very stub end of the transcontinental Canadian Pacific Railway. There's a book that was published called The CPR's English Bay Branch, and I didn't know at the time, but when I used to walk down to the beach, there was sort of a right-of-way there, and then there was an old steam train down at the beach we played on as kids, and fast forward now, I realize that was the very end of the CPR Transcontinental Railway, and that's what's my first interest I found in trains. And that's where the whole, BC Electric, BC Hydro, and now formerly SRY Rail Link, which I model, that's where it all began. It's about a 100-mile-long railroad in the Lower Fraser Valley of British Columbia. And I tried N-scale first, and then HO in the 70s I can't remember what was available then.
We had the Athearn blue boxes, and remember there was Tyco.
Right. Yeah, the Athearn switcher. It was an MP15, I think.
Yes.
And it ran so good.
And
ran so good, I built a shelf layout around it.
And remember the Hustler, the Athearn Hustler?
Yeah, the Hustler, yeah. So, the first layout that I built was actually a shelf layout. I was inspired from I don't know who it was. It was in an old model railroad magazine. It might have been Malcolm Furlow. I'm not really sure. But it was just this sort of multi-level shelf layout that was 8 feet long and 16 inches deep, which is what the former Glover Road was built after. 50 years later, I revisited the same genre, right? Yeah, that's how it started. But I never was really sort of influenced by the traditional model railroad. I just loved miniatures and models. And so when I did the shelf layout, it was just point to point. So I didn't really get the circle thing. I just thought it was for around the Christmas tree, And when it came to doing a layout like that, it just didn't make sense to me. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to model a scene, from a railroad, So, and it's just always kind of been like that. And of course, with that kind of style, you want to keep adding on, That's the same for everyone.
Yeah, so dioramas and shelf layouts have fascinated you since you were young. What was it about small focus scenes that hooked you earlier on? Because we call these, BOOMER has actually trademarked the name, although Aurora N-Scale wants to sue him for using the term postage stamp scenes, postage stamp trains, remember?
Yeah, I don't know. The art of the diorama was probably most influenced by a man named Ray Anderson. He put out a book. You can still get it on eBay. It's called The Art of the Diorama by Ray Anderson. And he did these it was sort of these historical, whimsical scenes, from the Old West and stuff, and history, like moments in history that he would model with overemphasized drama. He was really popular at the time. And so when I read that book, I read it till it fell apart. And it was like, well, why can't I do this on the model railroad? And then I realized that, well, you can't do this on a large model railroad because there's too much intensity. The diorama is this sort of emphasis on detail on the story in the round, which in a way makes sense with the model railroad because a model railroad is a story in the round in many cases. However, I just was drawn to that sort of more close in. I want to capture the spirit and the theme and the emotion of the railroad on a smaller footprint.
So you were able to take, you're talking about Ray Anderson, and I think I read about him on your Box Dioramas website where referred to a lot of artists and talk about a lot of artists and building in that genre. Did that help you approach to your diorama building today?
Oh, yeah. It sort of dovetails together. I mean, John Allen was like that, So,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
He was sort of the godfather of the sort of artsy kind of expression within the model railroad with the big dramatic, mountains and bridges. And, when you looked at his layout, you could just see that he really modeled, he was very passionate about expressing how he was affected emotionally about a railroad in particular. And I think that most model railroaders are really like that. They just don't identify with that particular philosophy because they don't care or think about it much. They just want to express how they view the railroad in the way that they do. But I think if you drill down, I think we're all affected by how we rail fan, like what we see and how we experience the railroad. Not necessarily that you need to experience a railroad to model a particular version, but we're just affected that way from the real world. And that's the way I am with River Road. These scenes are very much a part of my life growing up. So I just express it that way and sew them together, with the license of compression, which is a big topic.
So at what point did you realize this just wasn't a hobby anymore, that you wanted to share it more publicly?
Wow, yeah, that's a good question. Early on, when I used to build models like dioramas and used to compete in shows and stuff, before there was even, I think it was even before the NMRA or the IPMS, International Plastic Model Society, was even out, there were model shows everywhere, like at Shoppers Drug Mart and the hobby shops, in the 60s and 70s. And I used to drop a model in there. And then I started to win awards and stuff at some international events like the Pacific National Exhibition. It sort of grew like that. And I began painting and doing all that kind of stuff on the side. And I would sell like figurines. It just became part of my life. It was my kind of thing that I did. And model railroading was always simmering in the background. I was always working on something, like a small, usually 4 feet by 16 inches. I built quite a few like that, just railroad scenes. So like as far as sharing it, I mean, I already was in a way, like at exhibitions and shows. But then when the channel began, which was, like I can't even remember when it was, 5 years, well, COVID, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Was that
20? Yeah. 2021. I think a lot of people got back into the hobby. There was a big movement into indoors, And then it was my wife that said, why don't you, I was sitting around kind of bored, doing nothing. And, you know what I mean? I was moping, thinking, what should I do with my life? Because I'm sort of semi-retired. And I hadn't been in it. Like, I'd been away from model building almost entirely for 5 years because I went back to school for a short stint. And then I was sitting around. I didn't want to read another book again after school. And it was like, my wife says, why don't you get off your butt and build something and just put it on YouTube?
And here's the interesting thing about that. I remember you saying it when you get to Glover Road and building Glover Road, you wanted to do it with what you had and see how far you could go before you had to spend a cent on it.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for, I can tell you've done your research, Chuck. Yep. I actually found the actual frame was already framed up. I had it in my shed. It was sort of something I started years before, and I just stacked it up in the shed where everything else gets stacked up. And there were two. There was like two 8-foot by 16-inch frames with two 2-foot centers cut from 3/4-inch plywood, I believe. So what I did was I set one up, and then I used the other one for the overhead lighting valance, and then just, pinned on a valance to block, the light out sort of thing. And then I just built this basically flat HO scale, point-to-point, short, sort of almost whimsical scene onto that 8-foot by 16-inch frame. Like, I didn't even put foam or cork on. It was straight onto the 1/8 loo, I think it was, or like door skin. And then I had a little 2-foot staging, like off-layout staging. And that layout, like I didn't have anything really. I had an old Stewart Hobbies unpainted C630 or something, and a few cars and some track. And I hand built all the turnouts because I didn't have a budget for it. Like, that was, when I went back to school, I was broke for a while, and it just started to evolve, and I just started to nickel and dime it, and it turned out to what it was, which I didn't think it would. Like, that's Glover Road. So it was sort of a primer. Like, it kind of got the juices flowing again, and it reformulated the disease.
The concept and the prototype now, as we switch over and talk about River Road, it's a shelf layout diorama built around signature scenes. What's the story you wanted this layout to tell, Boomer?
Wow, so that's a good question too, isn't it? You're full of good questions, Chuck. It's like, okay, so what is the story like as the layout is? Well, I mean, the layout is a last mile switching layout is really what it is. That's highly detailed and hyper compressed. So I mean, I have like 6 or 7, signature scenes from the railroad that I visited that I would love to model, but I had to delete some of them. Like in the 26 feet that I have, like modeling now, I have more room for extension, but I had to figure out, okay, so I'm going to devote one 10-foot section to one particular scene, and then section 2, I'm going to do a scene there. And then section 3 the same. And I'm going to have them represent the regions that run along the railroad. And then in between each section is left to the imagination, or that's where the real compression is, what you don't see. Because I think, that's something that we can't get away from. You just can't get away from trying to have it all and then cutting out all the stuff you'd also like,
You chose the SRY short line in southern British Columbia as your primary inspiration. Why? Because you could walk to it?
Actually, I actually grew up around it. All the locomotives that are on the layout that I'm modeling now, like I have a list that I'm trying to build up as sort of the long-term goal. They were all painted, except for the GP9s. The SD38s, the MP15s, and the SW900RSs were all yellow. Like they're in the yellow with the hydro herald on the side. And they used to switch down behind Molson's Brewery just by the Burrard Bridge where the old swing bridge was. And I lived a few blocks away from there. So after school, that's where I'd go. I'd go down there and just sit and watch them, switching cars down there and stuff. And it was just a really cool place to be. You could swim down there and fish, but it was the railroad. That's what really grabbed my attention. And so naturally I just started to photograph it when I got my first camera, and so I built up quite an archive of photographs. And, fast forward 40 plus years later, I had all the research. Like I had all the research of the railroad basically and photographs to build from. I thought, well, this is the layout that I've always wanted to build for 30 years. I'm doing it. And it's just such a thrill. I just love working on this layout. The only thing that probably would be a source of frustration for me is the deletion factor. You just can't have some scenes that you'd really like in a limited footprint or space, which we're all limited at the end of the day anyway, aren't we? Section 1 is Annacis Island.
Yes.
And then there's a leap of faith to New West, which isn't far. It's over the Derwent Way Bridge. Over to New West. And then that was a compilation of prototype buildings and then, the strong regional British Columbia trees and so on. And then the third section was where I live, out where IPEX Plastics is, the industry that I go by almost every day. And then the farm sort of rural community. And then beyond that, it like the railway goes out to Chilliwack. And then it crosses the line down to Montana Railway.
How far is it from the plastics to Milner, prototypically?
IPEX Plastics and Milner is like half a mile away.
Wow. And it is selectively compressed, like all the scenes are. But
you could stand on the roof of IPEX and you could see the Milner grain elevator. Well, I mean, it's not there now. They just tore it down, but which is another reason why I'm glad I'm remodeling it, like the actual scene on the elevator. But you can see the elevator, or could from, if you stood on the roof of IPEX Plastics, like it's not that far away.
Right.
But there's still compression. Compression is such a fascinating topic. Like, I like to call it artistic license. Like, it's like, okay, so here's my footprint. This is the railroad I love. These are the scenes I'm inspired to build. And this is what's going to get all the attention. I don't care about what's in between.
Yeah.
Like, that resides in the theater of the mind. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I have this really cool layout with 7-foot wide aisles. I guess I take it for granted. I love being able to move around my layout and walk right up to it like I'm there. And just like there's no hinders. There's no duck unders. That's one of my druthers. No duck unders.
All right, so okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So you describe River Road as a series of signature scenes or postage stamp scenes. How did you decide which ones earned that status out of all of the available areas that you could model on the prototype?
Oh, that's another good question. So the first section 1, So section 1 was obvious to me because I realized that, okay, so I'm going to design and build this shelf layout, but how am I going to get traffic, like bridge traffic, on and off the layout? Like, how am I going to build the story if it's just 2 stub ends from either end? Well, I could have a fiddle yard and just drop cars on manually with my hand and then, write a story, let's say, or live it out in operations, short 15-mile-an-hour top speed operations. That was all planned in, and that works well. But when I found out about the Annacis Island Marine Terminal, I started to research it because wasn't built. I think it was built about 20 or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. It was a late addition. So I started researching all that, and I realized that the ENN, the SVI, the South Vancouver Island, is owned by the same corporation, and the way they connect the SVI with the SRY is through barges and ferries. And the ferry had so much history, and it had such a good photographic reference of it. It was an old ex-CP boat, and that's how they moved rail traffic and road traffic back and forth in the 70s before they built all the steel Bennett boats, the Vancouver Island boats. So that's how they would connect the two railroads together. So I thought, well, there's my fiddle yard. It's underneath the layout. I load up the ferry with, half a dozen cars. I can bring it up on, so it's open-ended staging. I can bring it onto the layout. It all connects. It all works perfectly. And I just switch the cars off the ferry to the interchange down on the end of Section 1 or Section 2. And then I put the empties that are going out. I can pull the ferry off, shove it underneath, and then load the ferry off layout. So that's the other world. That's where that extension of the railroad exists in the theater of the mind. The other end of the railroad, which isn't completed yet, will be similar. It'll just be off layout staging. I think that's the only way you can approach a smaller shelf layout if you want a bigger world and bridge traffic,
So it's real interesting because of 1, 2, and 3. What happens at the end of 3? Do you ask your wife to go around the hallway? Or is that it?
It's all in writing. It's all in writing. Like there's more room. There's more room. So the room is, I think it's 12 by 12, or actually just over 12 feet by. But you know what? When you have 16 to 24 inches is probably the sweet spot, I think, for a shelf layout like this. I chose 24 because I composed a scene like what I wanted in terms of depth. But you would be surprised, when you're running, when you get this, hyper speed running and looping out of your mind, and you're just switching, and the maximum speed is 15 miles an hour, and you realize how long it takes to switch one industry. It takes an hour. People don't realize that, because I think that we're just indoctrinated with trains running at speeds that are not even scale or realistic, or maybe we're crossing a vast distance. But how long does it take on a large layout to get from one town to the other? It doesn't take very long. So if you take a shelf layout like this, you say, okay, I got to unload the ferry. You're going to be operating for an hour and a half if you do it prototypically. You
got your ESP on, man. You're looking at my next question. So I say it's not just a display. It's an operating HO scale shelf layout. Now, how do you define meaningful operations in a small space? And River Road focuses on last mile switching rather than continuous running. Explain the concept and what appeals to you.
People might think that they look and go, oh, it's a very pretty layout, but this layout is completely reliable and functional in every way. It has signals on it. All the track is it's all bust, including the ferry. It's all lit. It's all everything works. All the switches are manual, the prototype. It's all radio blocking anyway. There's a few signals that SRY deals with, when they go through interchanges. But it's I don't know if it gets that much exposure. It probably would in the circles of the RPM, the Railroad Prototype Modeler Associations, and I know the NMRA is aware of it too. But shelf layout operations, last mile operations like this, are the immersion is in the detail. It feels huge, this layout, because if I walk down to the actual location, I can look right and look left. I can only see so far. So when I walk up to a layout that's as immersive as this, I'm pouring all my energy into a smaller, postage stamp scene, if I can use the term, or smaller area, it just raises the bar, of operations, especially when you're just idling there and ready to just hook up two cars and then, okay, these got to go down there. It's the same thing as a large layout where people I need more track to gobble up more space and add more time. It's the same kind of philosophy, but it's just a different style on a smaller footprint. So I love the realism because I love to model at the end of the day. Every aspect of the railroad, I love the history. I love rail fanning the locals. I love short lines for good reason, because I think they're made to be modeled, really, like for this type of style of layout. I love doing custom locomotives. I love doing the scenery. I love all of it. It's such a fantastic hobby for somebody that's creative, you know.
So how do you plan a scene to capture the feeling of a real place that you're doing when space is limited? Because you talk about selective compression all the time, but you've done artistic compression.
Yeah, that's probably a good term for it. Like when I built section 1, it's really very much close to the prototype, although I had to compress the length of it a bit. So it's in 11 feet, but the actual prototype from the end of the barge slip to Axton Steel is, it's probably 300 yards or something, but that ends up being 16 to 18 feet roughly. I don't know if my math is exactly right there, but you can never get in what you really want. Like in the mind's eye, like we all go through this. Everybody does. You have a scene, you look at it, you go, oh, I love that scene, I have to model it. And then you have this allotted space that you got to sketch, you got to draw, and then you put all this track in and none of it fits, you know. And that was the problem that I had, and that is why I chose to build all custom-made turnouts, and every single turnout almost is curved. Like there's a few that are not, but I had to bend, where the barge ramp is to get down to make the turn down to section 2. It all had to be curved turnouts. I didn't have the tangent space to put them in. And the prototype is a little bit like that, but obviously it's wider. They're always wider. The prototype curves are always wider than the greatest or largest turnout that we use in the model or in the hobby anyway. But I managed to pull off what I felt was a fairly faithful representation of a prototype scene on Annacis Island. And then when I was looking at section 2, I thought, oh boy, what am I going to do now? I don't want to do the same 10 feet with the boring warehouse that's attached to it. Like I wasn't interested in doing, linear foot per foot per foot per foot. I mean, I wouldn't even make it to the auto rock yard, which isn't far from that, but I don't have room for it. Like I would love to do the auto rack yard, but that would be a subject for end scale,
Yeah. Do you prioritize operational accuracy, visual storytelling, or a balance of both, Boom?
Well, I think a balance of both is probably what I do. Like I'm not legalistic about those type of things. I think that's like a straitjacket to somebody's creativity. I think if you're so hung up on every prototypical aspect of a railroad, and none are anyway. Like we like to think they are, but they're not. Because if you visit the local, let's say that you're modeling, you begin to realize, well, no, this doesn't translate, either because of scale or it's just impossible to do. So at the end of the day, it's really an impression. It's an expression of the particular modeler and how they interpret the railroad that they choose to model. I break the rules if there are any. I mean, like when I went to section 2 from section 1, like what was I going to do? The trees make sense, although they're probably not that many. I want to feel good. Like I want to embellish the scene, so when I walk up to it, I feel like I'm drawn in and I'm enjoying looking at the layout and not just running it. So, yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I break all the rules, and I'm not legalistic about prototypical modeling, even though I'm actually sort of influenced heavily by it.
Basically, in this question, where do you give yourself permission to bend prototype rules for the sake of storytelling? I think the first scene on section 1, the barge slip and the ferry slip, is phenomenal, how you were able to shrink that. And also, as you say, the mighty Muddy Fraser, just a portion of it. Bet you wish you would have been able to do the whole river, but we can't because, again, let's use the term artistic compression. Talk to me about how you've been able to shrink those scenes and make them just as awesome as they are.
I mean, there's compression right there. So everything is a component. The ferry's a component. The barge slip is a component. The Axton Steel transload facility is a component on the model. So they're all little scenes within it. So sort of this mosaic of scenes. Like I think that's unique to each person. Like you have to decide that. Like you have to decide what's important. It was really important that I had the ferry and the barge slip, but then it was also important. Like how am I going to make the turn? So I got to keep inching it out. I mean, it came down to like an inch. Like the actual barge slip is actually squeezed up against the shore more than it is on the prototype. Because then again, it's ridiculous. Your bench work could be 4 feet deep. Who wants 4 feet deep bench work? To put more river in? There's enough of the river. There's plenty of river for me. And when the ferry comes up, I slide a cantilevered, solid oak cradle. And I'm not looking down below at empty space anymore. I'm looking at the ferry, and I'm focusing on the operations. And the ferry, why do I need the full-length ferry? Because if I have the full-length ferry, there's way too many cars. I have to decide how long my trains are going to be. If I build a full-length ferry, I got to take the door off the bedroom. It's compromise, right?
Right. Well, I know one of the conundrums earlier on too was the brewery. Was it going to be closed? Was it going to be open? What were you going to do there? Were you just going to have the line roll through there? Were you going to put another siding into the brewery? That is such a signature scene through those trees, looking there at all the scattered detail. That's just turned out phenomenal. And I know that was quite a quandary for you in the beginning.
Yeah, it was, because the problem I had was, I'm looking at it now and I love this scene. It's my favorite scene. I lean up into the corner. It's a curved fascia. It's very comfortable to stand and look, and you can operate from when the ferry's not in town. But it's I had to compress the depth of it too to make it work. I just did not have the room. So if I put the siding, the siding's pretty much gone now. They took it out. But so I just laid a bunch of rail and ties in there, and I had to squeeze it a bit, and it wouldn't have, there wouldn't have been enough space. If I add the siding in, the shoreline comes out, the barge slip comes out, my balance comes out, and now I'm losing my aisle space. Now I have a scene that's 36 inches deep, and my minimum is 24, or actually my maximum was 24. And I don't even like to model in 24 depth, but I knew when I did this layout, that was what it had to be. So that's why I had to squeeze, the depth-wise, compress the brewery and then just build it as a flat. I don't want a big building. What's the point of having a big building when I'm standing there eye level and all I see is what I see when I walk around? The brewery was also moved. It was moved down closer. If you looked on Google Earth, if you look at the site, I shoved it down more closer to enrich and embellish the scene where the barge head is as well, right? So that's another form of editing creatively in that sense. I think that, compression oftentimes is really just adjusting the layout to fit your desire. That's really what it is.
All right, this is my favorite part of the whole podcast, craft techniques and realism, or things Boomer taught us. Now, your work is known for its realism. For people that don't know, that I hate to use the phrase, but been under a rock and don't know your incredible channel, Boomer Dioramas, what techniques do you rely on to model creative, lifelike scenery and terrain?
I think that one of the things that I wanted to emphasize on this layout was my use of color. And because I basically learned in film about, from really good, top-notch painters, scenic painters. I learned it from them. When practically the first couple of days I worked in film, I was on a soundstage, and I watched these painters pumping these canisters that were full of water with, burnt umber tint in them and stuff, shooting it onto sets and walls and letting it dry and the big fans and putting on other colors. And I wondered how they aged it all. And so I figured, well, why not do that in miniature? It should work. And it does. It works really good, especially with acrylic paint, fast-drying acrylic paint that I really like to use. So, my plan was all acrylic, mostly on this, and matte mediums. That was important, the adhesives and the medium being used on the layout, because I didn't want to put all this energy and work into a layout with all this experience of museum work and so on in my past, and then have it crumble and fall apart in 10 years, Because this is a common thing that happens with layouts as they dry out. People don't realize that. So when you build this model railroad, you might marry this thing for a long time. So as you're getting along years down the road, building and adding, you don't want things to be falling apart and warping and, because it just defeats the whole purpose, right? You put all that trouble in and you go back and it's oh no, right? I got to redo all this. So that's why I put the extra effort in the trees, especially too, with acrylics and matte medium, because now I can grab the tree. It's 5 years on. I can grab the tree and stuff it into a vacuum, and it doesn't do anything. It just sucks the dust off if there is any, and it just holds its shape. So I have a layout that if I do pass it on, or if I do, have it as an heirloom or for a long period of time, it'll stand the test of time. And the colors are vibrant. They're as vibrant as they were when I first laid them on, even though they're subdued. Like they have a very strong color fast value, which is why I use, the professional paints. Like to me, it's a professional paint. And Golden and Liquitex. That's why I use all those paints.
Well, you turned us on to Golden and Liquitex. I mean, a lot of modelers now are talking about, I've spread the word all over Hex Half Acre about using crackle paste. I went into Michael's the other day, and by the way, Michael's here, in the lower 48 in the United States, most of the stores have that product 50% off right now. So I was looking at what is normally like $29 for, the matte medium that you use, like half off that. And it's absolutely essential to use higher quality products. And you turned me on and everyone else on to Tamiya paints, and we swear by it. Now, I will not use those Walmart 99-cent things for anything other than, side work.
Well, I mean, you might as well just use like latex then. If you're going to buy craft paint because you want to cover a large area, which makes sense. Like, I'm not going to pour my, like I'm not going to take my Vallejo and my Tamiya and pour it onto this whole side of a mountain.
No.
But I'm not going to use craft paint either. I'm going to go and get bare, like a really good house latex, which is way more cost effective. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to just a custom color. I like this earth color. And I'm going to water that down too. And the gallon will be there forever, So, you can get a gallon of earth from Home Depot if you want, like good latex paint that's water-based. But when it comes to airbrushing, no, you can't airbrush that paint. Like, you can't airbrush it like the way you want to with any kind of control. Like, if you want to shift the color of a tree or a trunk or blend soil into ballast and things, the airbrush with isopropyl alcohol and Tamiya or that type of acrylic is really, for me, like in my experience, the go-to way to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've spread that word to us where if I just about every YouTube video I watch now and I see a guy airbrushing, it's like 3/4 IPA and 1/4 Tamiya now, because we all know that A, it looks better, it's easier to control, and C, you don't have a gunked up airbrush.
Like, you raise another good point about airbrushing. A lot of people are afraid to use an airbrush, and I know why. At least I have one of the ideas why they are. They don't want to clean the airbrush, or they have a bad experience with it. So here's the thing. If you have a decent compressor, like you can buy them at, Home Depot or, a tool place for $150 or something, and it has a tank on it. And you could take some IPA from the pharmacy. In fact, you can buy isopropyl alcohol for $1 a bottle. I've seen it. Or buy the gallon at horse and tack places.
Yeah.
And if you just start thinning, so you take your Tamiya paint and you get a big bottle of IPA, you dip the brush in, and then try shooting that on paper and watch how strong the pigment is. You'll never clog your airbrush. And it's easy to clean because you can leave the paint in there and it'll melt it out a month later, because Tamiya acrylic will always melt down if you pour IPA onto it. It's a weird kind of chimera paint. Like, I love that about it. You can mix it with water, too, if you want.
Yeah, I've noticed
that. And, I find, like, I try to encourage people every now and again. I'll drop a video about learn to use an airbrush. Like, get a decent compressor, but don't spend a lot on a really expensive airbrush. Just learn how to use it. Just shoot paint, like on a big piece of cardboard. Bring it onto your layout. And before you know it, you'll be into it. Like, the scenery, airbrushing scenery is the easiest thing to do.
We got a lot of folks that are doing that now, too. I just watched he's airbrushing his field grass and his static grass, and I'm going, there we go, another Boomer School graduate. And what you can accomplish by doing that changes everything and merges all the color composition together.
The big wake-up call that I had, I was about, I think I was 10 years old, 11 years old, and I had one of those, remember the Badger, these little Badger airbrush. I think it was Badger and Pache that came out in the late 60s, early 70s, I think.
Yes.
And
with the big bottle on it, with the big bottle on it, with the white cap.
Right,
with the white cap.
The big jug.
Yeah.
The big jug, right? So, you fill the whole thing full of paint, It's like it won't go anywhere, So I quickly learned, I don't know, by accident, I might have spilled some paint or something, and then I realized I'm going to thin this down, course, it was like mineral spirits or something and Humbrol paint.
Yeah.
And I grabbed this earth, like I had this jar and I was cleaning it out. It was full of, like mineral spirits. And there was a little bit of earth in there. I was trying to clean it out. But I'm going to shoot this through my airbrush and see what happens. So I started spraying all my, my foam, like all the woodland scenic foam, all this stuff, with this super thin earth over everything. And it put this filter over everything, and it just harmonized everything. I went, oh my goodness, right? Is it that easy? And I never forgot that. So now I do that selectively with acrylic. I do the same thing, whether it's the static grass, the right of way, the trees, whatever. But you don't need an airbrush to build a model railroad. Do it with washes too, with just traditional wet, a lot of water and stabbing and color letting it.
That's another thing that folks are using too that we've stole what Boomer taught us. The wet on wet technique of just taking a spray bottle of water, spraying whether it's plaster or it's the side of a building or whatnot, and then either letting paint flow or dabbing it on with a brush and then watch it go wild. It's so cool.
Yeah, it is. And when you use a bit of flow agent, I used to use like Dove, a couple drops of Dove dish soap. It just was magical. It took all the tension, off the surface of the area you're painting. It just flowed so nice. Like I learned all that. Like I learned from my wife. She was an art teacher and she studied the classics.
Wait a minute. You let that out?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody knows that.
From the University of Nebraska, right? Yeah. Anyway, like art history, and she told me that the old masters, the oil painters, would take these little watercolor tablets out into the field, and they would dip in a bit of water, and they would do a field sketch with lots of water, from a creek or something, and you would see them how they would flow, and like that's where that came from. It was always wet, the surface they worked on, and they would bring that little field sketch back to their studio and then paint the oil on canvas from the field sketch. So that's just that. So it's not new. It's just another technique.
Oh, it's an old watercolor painting technique that was,
That's right.
Great watercolor artists would always use the wet on wet. So what's been the most challenging scene or diorama you built so far, and what did it teach you?
Well, the ferry and the barge slip was the most challenging.
I bet.
Yeah.
Do I only have to build half this? Yes, I only have to build half this. This is great.
Yeah. Well, it was 9 months. Every day I worked on it. Like I poked away at it. Like even after work, I would sit down for an hour or two and, sketch something, try a part, do a dry. Oh, okay, this will work. But I knew that if I shelved it, I'd never finish it because I get distracted by something else, which is so easy to do in this hobby. Yeah. So I just stayed with it. And I actually built it in a way, very solid, like substructure on birch plywood and maple and so on. It's all encased in plastic and everything the way I learned in film. And then I also built it so that I could actually build the other half of the ferry. It would just sort of modular, just sort of slide in with two rails. So I left that option open. And then, of course, the barge slip, which was the first component I built, which was also built on Baltic birch plywood and a solid maple spine just for stability. One thing I learned in this hobby, don't underestimate your track bed, what it might do in 3 or 4 years.
So that's why you've taught us, and you're super plugged into talking to us about using a good solid hardwood road bed and using varnishes and sealants.
Yeah, I think that plywood, like good quality plywood, is probably one of the most sturdiest surfaces you can ever put track down on. Now, I know there's the whole noise suppression issue thing. That's a whole other topic, but I laid mine down on 3/8 plywood and then 1/4-inch cork, and then matte medium. I use matte medium because matte medium's not brittle like PVA. It doesn't resonate sound. Like if you use PVA over your ballast and everything, it's sort of a snare drum effect. You notice it magnifies the sound of the train if that bothers you more. But with matte medium, it's more absorbent. It's kind of it never goes hard or brittle matte medium. And you can lift it with IPA too if you want to save your track. But it has this sound deadening quality that's much better than PVA. And once again, that's based on my own experience of building railroads, many different sizes and using that. And I get why people do. There's nothing wrong with doing it if that's what you want to do. But, the longer you're in this hobby, and if you keep modeling and you have good health, you're going to evolve some of your practices for sure if you think they're better.
You're not a giant fan of using extruded foam for the sub road bed. You use it for scenery.
Not for road bed, no. Okay, so not for road bed, but for foreground slopage. Like all my foreground slopage, because on section 1 it's elevated, right?
Right.
Because the river is the sea level. That was another challenge. Was at the very beginning. Okay, here's the tide.
Yep.
It's 2:00. Right? The moon says it's here. The moon says, here's the tide, so all the rest comes off of that. You don't want your barge slip half submerged. I don't want high tide. And then you got to think, okay, so the ground, as you're going from section 1 to 2, the fascia tapers ever so slowly. You can see until you get up to elevation to where you're level at Glover Road on section 3. So all that foreground is foam, like the whole sloping. I just stuffed foam in there and carved it back and scenic it. And then the background slope is all foam as well. But no, I won't put track on foam. I know why people do it, but I found foam doesn't really sound dead in that much. It can actually like if it's put underneath a wood sub road bed, like glued underneath your framework and plywood, that's the correct way to sound dead if you're into that. But
right.
I just didn't find it stable enough, Although there are advantages to that method as well, right? You can cut ditches in at will without worrying about dealing with nasty plywood if that's what you're going to do. You have to think ahead a little bit about it, and you have to also be willing to sacrifice some of your plywood because you're going to cut curved pieces out. You want to try to, not waste the good plywood just because you only want the plywood where the track is going to be, and the rest maybe. Where there's slopes, you don't need plywood there. Why would you? You just stuff foam in there, Tree planting.
Oh, yes.
That was it. Slopes, foregrounds, and background. It's a dream when you're composing trees and buildings and elements and roads, because you can look at a scene and go, okay, I think I'm going to cut a road in here and put a little farmhouse at the top of that winding road, or I'm going to stab in 12 trees. I don't like the composition of the trees. I want to take 2 out and move the big one over to the right and the 3 smaller ones to the left a bit. You can do that at will with foam. You just plunge through the fast mesh into the foam because the bottom of the tree is wire if you built them that way. And it's just a dream to compose your scene. And then when it clicks, You've been a big proponent for acrylic water. And what I love about Boomer is when he talks about stuff, he goes, you can use that, but you won't like it. This is better. And we'll go, he's right. Okay, so you mean the controversial topic of water versus epoxy resin?
Yeah.
So that's right. So I get why people use epoxy resin, and if you want to use that, great, but not me. I can remember one time I only used it one time in my shop. I had a shop with a concrete floor, and the next morning when I got up, I poured a trough full of that stuff, and I had a big puddle that hardened on my shop, ruined my shop floor.
Oh, even with a dam on it?
Yeah, I found a pinhole.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And then, there's the ugly creep into the beautiful shoreline that you laboriously model in.
Yes.
Look at that nice, beautiful taper of low tide. All those kinds of things. And then it's the worst for collecting dust. I hate that stuff. I'll just say that. I'm sorry I have to say it, but when I just paint, seal the plywood, paint the color I want, and build up layer after layer after, even if I have to lay 12 layers of acrylic clear stippled, I'll do it. And right now, my water, the water where the bar sip is, it looks great, and it's like arborite, right? It's like arborite. It's beautiful. It's easy to clean. It doesn't scratch. I don't need to look into the, water, the fish. I want to see the trains. I don't care about that, But, and it's expensive. Epoxy is very expensive. But people use it to good effect, though. I'll give them that. People use it to good effect. And once again, this is just my opinion about how I model. It's an artist product. It's an artist medium, and I think it just looks fantastic. And I can put things down on top of it, cameras and such, and tools, and I never have to worry about any damage or scratch because it gets harder year after year. I love it.
The Boomer Diorama YouTube channel reaches a massive global audience. When did it hit you that your work had grown beyond just sharing with friends?
Yeah, it seems like a blur now, which had been, because I was working on an update for down the road. I think I was mentioning something about that. How long has it been? I sort of put the question out to the viewers because I couldn't, it seemed like a blur, like just making the content, building the railroad, setting up the camera. Like now it seems routine, but before it was like, I need to share this. I mean, my wife was the one that was really behind it, that whole sort of idea. She says, you need to build a railroad and share it with people, inspire them. That's kind of what I did. And then it started getting momentum, and the comments are just so classy and so, I mean, the community around Boomer Diorama, I'm so thankful for everyone. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm actually blown away, actually, by the community and how mature and encouraging they are and supportive they are. And it feels neat, right? Because when you're building a layout like this and as busy as I am, you don't have time to socialize. You don't have time to really go to all the big shows and meets and everything because you're building the layout and you're working. So, but you still have a sense of community via social media, or in this case, YouTube, which is a fantastic platform, the best video platform in the world today to share, like for creators to share. And so I now realize that more than anything. So, I enjoy doing it, Chuck. I'm having fun, and inspire and educate a little bit and just share the journey, because that's really what it's about. Boomer Diorama River Road is really about one guy and his journey building, a prototypically influenced short line model railroad and all the things that are experienced doing that. And that's what motivates me more than anything.
Viewers and listeners to discover River Road or watch Boomer Diorama, what do you hope they take away from the experience?
Well, I hope that they practice and then they will glean skills. Skills follow practice, and confidence is the result of practice and then the reward. And if I experience the rewards that I do on this layout, then they do as well. And that's what really is behind a lot of, my sort of sharing of it. It's just such a fantastic hobby. It's very wholesome, holistic in some ways. It's very family orientated. It crosses all borders of people, all age groups. It's I don't know how you can really sum up the hobby, because like as a creative expression, there's just something there for everybody. Like even electronics, it's not my favorite part. I just have to do what I need to do. But, it's there as well, right? So why not? There's a reward in all of it. You ever see somebody build a yard like schematic board with electronics? Like it's crazy, but they love it, and it's part of the hobby. And so they get a reward from it. And if I can encourage in some way or help somebody feel good about what they're doing, then all the power to it. And I'm having fun, and I hope they are too.